She hid in a cart to escape the claiming ceremony, and was delivered straight to the Alpha King. The sound of drums was never a good sign in Edenmore. Mira knew that much before she even opened her eyes that morning. She had been lying on her narrow bed listening to the rhythm build from somewhere deep in the village square, low and steady and patient, the way a headache builds before it breaks. She counted the beats without meaning to. 4 per second, then 5. Then the gap between them shrank until the sound stopped being individual strikes and became one long, rolling pressure that settled in her chest and stayed there. She sat up. Through the small window above her bed, the sky was turning the color of ash at the edges and a deep, bruised purple at the center. Not quite night, not quite day. The particular hour that Edenmore reserved for things it did not want the sun to witness. She had known this day was coming. She had known it for 3 weeks, since the announcement was posted on the board outside the elders' hall, and her neighbor Clara knocked on her door with wide eyes and a voice 3 tones higher than normal, to tell her she had better come read it. Mira had read it twice, very slowly. The way she read things she hoped would change their meaning on the second pass. They had not changed. The claiming ceremony was scheduled for the night of the blood moon. All unmated females between the ages of 19 and 24 were required to present themselves in the square by the 7th drumbeat. Failure to attend would be considered a refusal of pack law. The consequences of refusal were outlined in language so formal and dry that it had taken Mira a full minute to understand they were threatening her with exile. She was 22. She was unmated. She had no father, no brothers, no pack elder to speak for her interests or argue her case or offer anything in her place. She had a 2-room house with a leaking roof that had been her mother's before her mother stopped waking up, and a job at the bread stall that paid her enough to keep herself fed as long as she was careful, and absolutely nothing else. She was, in every way that Edenmore's laws recognized, on her own. For 3 weeks she had been thinking about what to do. She had thought about presenting herself and trusting that no one would want her. She was not the kind of girl stories were written about. She had dark circles under her eyes from too many early mornings, hands roughened from the bread stall, and a tendency to say the exact wrong thing at the exact right moment. Maybe no one would choose her. Maybe she would stand in the square for an hour and then walk home. But she had seen the list of who was attending the ceremony. She had seen the names of the pack leaders who had sent notices of participation, and one of those names had made her stomach drop through the floor and keep going. Elder Croft's second son, Owen, had been choosing a mate from the claiming ceremony for 3 consecutive seasons. Each of the women he had chosen had left Edenmore within a year under circumstances no one talked about clearly. One had gone to live with distant relatives. One had developed a persistent illness. One had simply stopped being seen. And when people asked about her, Elder Croft smiled the particular smile of a man who does not answer questions. Owen was 38, thick-necked, and watched Mira across the bread stall every morning with the fixed, patient attention of someone who had already decided on something and was simply waiting for the moment to collect it. She was not going to stand in that square. She had made this decision 11 days ago and spent the time since building a plan out of nothing. She had no money for travel beyond the village boundaries. She had no family in any of the surrounding settlements. She had no pack connections, no favors to call in, no name that anyone with power would recognize. What she had was the merchant quarter, which sat at the back edge of Edenmore where the village bled into the trade road, and which on the night of the blood moon, when every person of standing would be at the ceremony, would be nearly empty and full of supply carts moving goods under cover of the quiet. She had spent 3 evenings walking through the merchant quarter after dark, memorizing routes, noting which carts were loaded the night before departure, which drivers left their cargo unattended while they ate at the inn, which vehicles were positioned where she could climb in without being seen from the road. She had found one that looked right, a large wooden cart, high-sided, loaded with sacks and crates, and covered with an oilcloth tarp. The merchant's mark on the side was not one she recognized from local trade, which meant it had come from somewhere else and would be going back there. Going anywhere was the requirement, anywhere that was not here. The drums hit their 5th beat of the sequence. She was out of bed before the echo faded. She pulled on her clothes in the dark, the same ones she wore to the bread stall because they were the most practical things she owned, dark and layered and with deep pockets, and she moved through her 2 rooms collecting what little she was taking. Some bread she had wrapped the night before. A small amount of money that represented every coin she had managed to save over 8 months of being careful. A letter she had written to Clara asking her to look after the house, which was probably optimistic but felt important to write. She left the letter on the table. She did not look back at the house. The village was in motion around her, but the motion was all going one direction, toward the square, toward the drums, toward the lights she could see flickering at the far end of the main road. She went the other way. She walked close to the walls of buildings, kept her head down, moved like someone on a routine errand who had no feelings about anything. No one stopped her. The few people she passed were too focused on their own paths, their own white clothes, their own faces arranged in the particular expression of people performing participation in a ritual they had not chosen but could not refuse. She turned off the main road. The merchant quarter was quieter. Torches burned at intervals, but the space between them was deep, and she moved through that space carefully, checking over her shoulder at every corner. Her heart was doing something uncomfortable and loud inside her chest. She ignored it. She was very good at ignoring her heart. She had been practicing for years. The cart was where she had left it in her memory, parked against the side wall of the storage depot, cargo loaded, first tarp tied down at the corners. The horse was not hitched yet, which meant the driver was likely still at the inn and she had time. She did not spend that time standing still. She found the edge of the tarp on the left side, worked two of the ties loose just enough to create a gap, and climbed in. It was dark inside, immediately and completely dark, the kind that has texture and weight. She pulled the tarp back into place behind her, and lay very still on top of a sack of something that smelled like grain, and pressed into her back at several uncomfortable angles. There was barely enough room. She could feel crates on either side of her, something that clinked softly when she shifted her weight, something else wrapped in burlap that had a shape she could not identify. She made herself still. She breathed through her nose, slow and deliberate. Outside, the drums were hitting their sixth beat. She counted the time in the dark. She counted slowly, the way her mother had taught her to do during thunderstorms when she was small and terrified, counting between the lightning and the thunder to measure how far the storm was. The storm outside tonight was not weather, but the counting still helped. It gave her mind something to do that was not panic. She was on her 312th count when she heard her name. It came over the noise of the drums and the distance and the walls of the cart and every other sound in Edenmore that night, and it landed in her chest with the precise accuracy of something aimed. Someone at the ceremony square was calling the names from the list. They were going in order. They had reached the M names. Mira of the lower quarter. A pause. Mira of the lower quarter, please present yourself. Another pause, longer this time. She held herself so still that she could feel her own pulse in the palms of her hands. There was a sound of murmuring from the direction of the square. She imagined Clara in the crowd, realizing. She imagined the list keeper marking something next to her name. She imagined Elder Croft's son turning to look at the space where she was not standing. Then the horse was hitched to the front of the cart. Then the cart moved. It moved in the way that large loaded carts move, slowly, with effort, with the particular creak and sway of something carrying weight over uneven ground. Mira pressed her face against the grain sack, and breathed, and did not make a sound. The cart passed through the merchant quarter, turned onto the trade road, and the sounds of Edenmore, the drums, the name-calling, the murmuring crowd, fell behind it the way sounds fall behind a closing door, one by one, until there was nothing. Just road, just wheels. Just the dark inside the tarp. She did not cry. She had thought she might at this point, but she did not. What she felt was not sadness exactly. It was more like the particular quiet that settles after something that has been building for a very long time finally breaks. A kind of exhausted release, like a breath held for years finally let go. She had left Edenmore in the back of a cart with bread, some coins, and nothing else, and it was the freest she had felt in recent memory. She let herself feel that for exactly 30 seconds. Then she started thinking about what happened next. Next, practically speaking, was a problem. She did not know where this cart was going. She did not know the driver. She did not know how long the journey would take or where it would end, or whether there would be any town at the other end where a woman with darkened hands and bread in her pockets could find work. She was going to have to be very careful about when she revealed herself, and how, and to whom. She would wait until they stopped. Somewhere with other people, somewhere public, where the driver could not do anything alarming without witnesses. She would climb out, explain that she had made an error, apologize thoroughly, and figure out from there where she actually was. It was not a great plan. It was the plan she had. She settled in for the journey. The cart moved through the night and into the earliest pale hours of morning. She drifted in and out of something that was not quite sleep, more like the shallow suspension of a person whose body has decided it needs rest even if the mind is still running calculations. She dreamed briefly of the bread stall, of flour on her hands, of Clara's voice telling her a piece of gossip about someone she barely knew. She woke up when the cart hit a particularly deep rut in the road, and her head connected with the crate beside her. She lay in the dark and listened. The road had changed. It was smoother now, better maintained, the kind of surface that suggested significant traffic or significant money, or both. The movement of the cart had also changed, slower, more deliberate, the way a driver controls a vehicle when approaching something that requires navigation. She could hear other sounds now, other wheels, voices at a distance, something that might have been a gate. She had assumed this cart was heading for a market town, a trading hub perhaps, somewhere busy and anonymous where she could disappear into the ordinary motion of commerce. She had not considered other possibilities. She began, very carefully, to examine the inside of the cart with her hands. The crates beside her were sealed, but not with the rough hasps of market goods. The fastenings were precise and uniform. She ran her fingers along the edges of the nearest one, and found a stamp pressed into the wood, deep and deliberate. She could not see it, but she could trace the shape of it with her fingertips, and the shape was not a merchant's mark. It was a seal, a specific, formal, government-issue seal of the kind stamped on official cargo, the kind she had seen exactly once before, pressed into wax on a notice posted outside the Elders' Hall. The symbol of the Ashen Palace. Her hand stopped moving. She lay in the dark and thought about what this meant for several slow, clear seconds. The drums of Edenmore were far behind her. The village was gone. Owen and his specific patience and Elder Croft's particular smile were behind her. She had solved one problem with breathtaking efficiency. She appeared to have created a different one. The cart slowed further. She could hear a voice, authoritative, close, asking the driver something. The driver answered in the clipped, precise dialect of the capital, confirming a delivery number, a cargo list, a point of origin. The authoritative voice said something about inspection. There was the sound of footsteps, more than one person, coming around the side of the cart. The tie on the tarp was being loosened. She had exactly the time it took to pull a tarp off a loaded cart to decide what she was going to say. She did not use that time well. The tarp came back. Morning light hit her like a physical thing. She blinked, eyes flooding with brightness, and found herself looking up at the faces of 4 palace guards in full uniform, the driver of the cart, and, with perfect, terrible timing, a goat that had apparently been sharing the cart with her for the entire journey, and had simply been very quiet about it. The guards stared at her. The goat regarded her with complete neutrality. The driver said a word she would not repeat. She sat up, brushed a significant amount of straw from her hair, and said the only thing she could think of. "I am the kitchen girl," she said. "I was hired last season. I fell asleep in the wrong cart." The convoy captain had a face built for skepticism. He looked at her the way people look at something that does not fit any existing category, and therefore requires a new one to be created specifically for it. He looked at the straw in her hair. He looked at the bread she was still holding, apparently having retrieved it from her pocket at some point during the last 30 seconds, without being aware of doing so. He looked at the goat. "What is your name?" he said. "Mira," she said. "Mira of the lower quarter." "Which kitchen?" he said. "The main one," she said. "There are 11 main kitchens in the Ashen Palace," he said. She had not known this. It felt like information she should have had before this moment. "The big one," she said. The captain's expression did not change. He turned to one of the guards and said something in a low voice. The guard nodded and walked away, presumably to check a list of some kind, or to inform someone of rank that there was a girl in the supply cart who claimed to be a kitchen employee and had bread. She sat in the cart in the growing morning light and looked at the palace for the first time. It was not what stories called it. Stories called it the Ashen Palace because of the gray stone it was built from, which the stories described as cold and forbidding and the color of a tomb. The reality was that the stone caught the early morning light and turned it warm, almost gold, and the towers were taller than she had imagined, and the gate she had come through was flanked by trees she did not know the names of that were in full bloom, and dropped soft petals across the road with every breeze. It was, if she was being honest, beautiful. It was also almost certainly about to get her into the worst trouble of her life. The guard came back. He spoke to the captain in a low voice. The captain's face shifted, not much, just a small tightening around the eyes that in a person with a more expressive face would have been a full wince, and then the captain looked at her with an expression that had moved from skepticism into something more complicated. "You'll need to wait," he said. "Of course," she said. "Where?" "Right there," he said. "In the cart. Don't move." She sat in the cart. The goat sat beside her. They waited together in the kind of companionable silence that two creatures share when neither of them fully understands the situation but both understand that the situation is serious. The palace gate remained open. Beyond it, the morning continued to arrive, warm and gold and entirely indifferent to the fact that her life had just taken a turn she had not planned for. She ate the bread because she had it and because eating is something a person can do while panicking that looks, from the outside, like composure. She was most of the way through it when she heard the footsteps on the stone path that led from the gate to the cart. Multiple sets, moving with purpose. The particular sound of people who walk as though the ground is going to cooperate with them because it understands that it had better. She looked up. The man at the front was not the captain. The man at the front was not a guard. The man at the front was tall and dark-haired and dressed simply enough that she might have thought he was a senior administrator if it were not for the way every other person present immediately adjusted their posture when they saw him coming. He stopped at the side of the cart. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the bread still in her hand and the straw still in her hair and the goat still beside her, and she understood, with the specific clarity that comes in the worst moments, exactly who she was looking at. The Alpha King. Standing in front of the supply cart she had hidden in, looking at her with eyes the color of deep water, and an expression that was not angry, not amused, not alarmed, but simply and completely patient. He said, "Why did you run?" She had not expected that question. She had expected to be interrogated. She had expected to be accused. She had expected a version of this moment that involved significantly more shouting and significantly less quiet. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at the bread in her hand. Then she told him the truth, because he had asked it simply and she was too tired and too far from home to build a better lie, and because something in the way he asked, not demanding, not threatening, just asking, just actually wanting to know, had reached past all her defenses before she could put them up. She told him about Owen, about the list, about the drums and the white dresses and the particular way Eldercroft smiled when someone asked about the woman who had stopped being seen. He listened. He did not interrupt. He did not look away. When she finished, there was a silence. Then he said, "You came a long way in a supply cart to avoid one man." "I came as far as I needed to," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not much. Just a small adjustment around the eyes and the line of his mouth that she could not fully read. He looked at the captain. He looked at the goat. He looked back at her. "Bring her inside," he said, and walked back toward the palace. She sat in the cart for 2 more seconds, bread in hand, straw in hair, and thought, this was not the plan. Then she got up, because what else was there to do, and she followed him in. She had 2 hours inside the palace before anyone gave her anything to eat other than the bread, and she spent those 2 hours in a small room near the east wing that had a chair, a window with a very nice view of the gardens, and a guard outside the door who was polite, but extremely clear about the fact that she was not to leave. She sat in the chair. She looked at the garden. She thought hard. The thinking did not produce anything especially useful, but it organized the problem, which was something. The problem was this. She had arrived at the Ashen Palace concealed in a supply cart, which was almost certainly illegal under some statute or another. She had told the Alpha King, a man whose authority extended across 6 territories and who had the kind of political power that made village elders look like children arguing over toys, a story about running away from a ceremony that was, at best, a personal problem and not his concern. He had not thrown her out. He had said to bring her inside. This could mean a number of things, none of which she could rank by likelihood, because she did not know enough about him to guess. She knew what the stories said. Everyone knew what the stories said. Cale Dravenmore, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, who had taken power at 26 after his father's death, who had in the 12 years since consolidated the 6 territories into something that functioned like an actual kingdom rather than 6-packs arguing constantly about borders and water rights. The stories called him cold, ruthless, difficult in the specific way that very intelligent people who do not suffer inefficiency are difficult. They said he had not taken a mate in 12 years, which depending on who you asked was either a sign of exceptional self-discipline or exceptional difficulty. They did not say much about what he was like in person. In person, he had been quiet. That was what she kept returning to. She had expected loud. She had expected the version of power that performs itself. He had not performed anything. He had stood at the side of a supply cart and asked one question and listened to the answer with his full attention, and then he had made a decision and walked away to implement it. She was currently inside the implementation. The door opened. A woman came in carrying a tray with food and water, set it on the small table beside the chair, and looked at Mira with an expression that was not unfriendly, but was extremely assessing. She was perhaps 40, with the kind of composed face that suggested she had seen everything and had opinions about most of it. "The king will speak with you this afternoon," the woman said. "My name is Edith. I manage the household staff. You'll want to clean up before then." "Yes," Mira said. "I am aware." "There is a basin through that door," Edith said, nodding toward a side door Mira had not noticed. "I will bring different clothes. Yours are—" She paused, selecting a word carefully. "Well-traveled." "That's one way to put it," Mira said. Something in Edith's expression shifted very slightly into what might, in another person, have been the beginning of amusement. She turned to leave. "The goat," Mira said. "That came in the same cart. Was it supposed to be here?" "It was a gift from the Merchant Guild in Caldermere," Edith said, without turning around. "It will go to the farm at the south end of the grounds." "Good," Mira said. "We traveled well together. I'd hate for it to end up somewhere bad." Edith left. The door closed. Mira ate the food on the tray, bread again, and cheese, and a portion of something warm that she was too hungry to identify before she ate it, and then used the basin in the side room to wash her face and hands and get the remaining straw out of her hair, which took longer than she expected because the straw had made commitments. She changed into the clothes Edith brought, which were plain and well-made and fit her approximately, and she sat back down in the chair and looked at the garden and waited. She was good at waiting. She had spent most of her life waiting for things to happen to her, waiting for the situation to become clear, waiting for the moment when some path forward would announce itself. She was less good at the part that came after, but the waiting itself she had practiced extensively. At midday, a different guard came to bring her down a corridor she did not know into a room she had not expected. She had expected an office, something official, formal, a setting designed to remind her of the distance between her and him. What she got was a library. Large, warm, lined floor to ceiling, with books in no order she could immediately detect, with a fire burning despite the mild weather outside, and two chairs positioned at an angle to each other beside a window that looked out onto the same garden she had been watching all morning from a different angle. Cale was already there, standing at the bookshelf with a volume in his hand, reading a page. He did not look up immediately when she entered. He finished the page, closed the book, and set it back in its place with the same unhurried patience he had brought to the supply cart that morning. "Sit down," he said, and it was not unkind. She sat. He sat across from her, and looked at her for a moment, with that same deep, focused attention that she was beginning to understand was simply how he looked at things. He was not trying to intimidate her with it, it was just how his attention worked, as though everything in his sight received his complete consideration before he moved on. "Tell me about Edenmore," he said. She told him. She told him about the village, the pack structure, the way the elders controlled most of the significant decisions, the claiming ceremony and its laws and what happened to women who refused. She told him about the list, and Owen and Elder Croft, and the 3 women who had vanished from Edenmore over 3 consecutive seasons. She told it plainly, without decoration, because decoration took energy she was currently using for other things. He listened. He asked 3 questions, each precise, each aimed at something specific: the numbers involved, the geography, the specific language of the law. The questions of someone thinking about structure rather than drama. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You are aware," he said, "that concealing yourself in a royal supply convoy is illegal." "I am aware now," she said. "I was not specific about the ownership at the time of entry." "You could not read the royal seal in the dark," he said. "No," she said, "I could not. And yet you climbed in regardless." "Yes, because anywhere was better than where you were." "Yes," she said. "That is an accurate summary." He was quiet again. Outside, a bird was singing something complicated and repetitive in the garden. "I could send you back," he said. "You could," she said. Her voice was steady. She had made her peace with this possibility in the small room that morning. "I won't," he said. She looked at him. "I have a need," he said, "for someone who can move through villages and lower quarters without being recognized as palace-connected. Someone with no ties to any existing pack, no obligations to any noble house, no history that would mark them as informant or agent. Someone who would be, to any observer, simply an ordinary person from an ordinary background passing through ordinary places." He looked at her with those deep, patient eyes. "You are," he said, "a woman from a village who has never been to the capital, who has no connections, who arrived here in a supply cart with bread and straw in her hair. You are, in practical terms, exactly what I need." She thought about this for several seconds. You want me to be your information gatherer, she said. I want you to be my eyes in places my formal agents cannot go without being noticed, he said. And in exchange, she said. In exchange, you are under palace protection. You will not be claimed under any Edenmore law or any other law while you remain in my household. You will receive wages and accommodation. You will not be returned to your village. She sat with this. It was, on its surface, a practical arrangement, a transaction. He needed something she could provide. She needed something he could provide. The math was simple. Except, she had felt something when she first climbed out of that cart and looked up at him. Something that was not simple and not mathematical and did not fit into any category she had a name for. A kind of recognition, not of who he was, not of his face or his reputation, but of something else, something that sat at the very back of her chest and had become slightly louder since she entered this room. She had heard about it, the way you hear about weather in places you have never been. The bond. The connection that was supposed to exist between fated mates, that the pack stories described in language that ranged from the clinical to the borderline theatrical depending on the source. She had heard about it and had privately considered it the kind of thing that happened to other people in other villages and had nothing to do with her practical, goat-adjacent life. But the sound in her chest was a sound she did not have another explanation for. She said nothing about this. She filed it in the same drawer where she kept all the things she needed to think about more carefully before she acted on them. Yes, she said, I will do what you are describing. He nodded once, as though she had confirmed something rather than agreed to something. Edith will explain the details, he said. You will start in 3 days, once you have rested and learned the layout of the palace. He stood, which she understood as the end of the meeting. She stood too. At the door, she stopped. The goat, she said, is going to the South Farm. He looked at her. It's a good goat, she said. It was very calm the whole journey. There was a pause so brief she almost missed it, a small moment, where something in his expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, into something she could not name. I will note its qualities, he said. She nodded and left. In the corridor, walking back toward her room with Edith's footsteps already coming to collect her, she allowed herself exactly 5 seconds of feeling the full weight and strangeness of everything that had happened in the last 18 hours. Then she put it away. She had work to do. She had a position, and wages and a roof, and protection from the one specific problem she had been running from. She was inside the most powerful household in the 6 northern territories, as something more than a refugee and something less than a prisoner, with a job that suited exactly the skills her difficult life had given her. She had run from Edenmore in the back of a supply cart with nothing. She had arrived at the palace as someone useful. That was more than she had planned for. She followed Edith down the corridor and listened and began to learn. The palace, it turned out, was not one building. It was a collection of buildings connected by corridors and courtyard passages and a series of internal gardens that served different functions depending on which wing they were adjacent to. The East Garden was for formal occasions. The North Garden was used by the household staff on rest days. The garden visible from Mira's room, which she had been looking at for most of the previous day, was the one attached to the library and the king's private working rooms, and which, Edith informed her without inflection, very few people entered without invitation. Mira had been looking at it for hours without knowing this. She filed that away with the other things. Her room was on the 3rd floor of the staff wing, which was comfortable in the way that places built for function rather than impression are comfortable. Everything was where it needed to be. The bed was better than anything she had slept in at home. The window looked out over the inner courtyard rather than anything especially interesting, and there was a small desk with a lamp that worked and a shelf that was currently empty. She had nothing to put on the shelf. She spent the first day learning the palace. Edith walked her through every corridor of the sections she would need to know, named every room and its purpose, pointed out which guards were posted where, and at what times they rotated. Mira did not write any of this down. She had a good memory, the kind that had been trained by years of managing a bread stall that required her to hold a dozen orders and 24 customer preferences in her head simultaneously. She remembered everything. On the second day, Edith introduced her to the other household staff. There were more of them than she had expected, enough that she understood the palace ran on the quiet and constant labor of people who were very good at being present without being noticed. She liked them on first meeting in the careful, measured way she liked most people at first, provisionally, observantly, reserving the actual opinion for later. There was a cook named George who was 62 and had been at the palace since before Kale became king, who held strong opinions about root vegetables and expressed them at every opportunity. There was a young man named Oliver who managed the linens and had an encyclopedic knowledge of which noble family had visited when and what they had done to the sheets, which he offered as information, with the enthusiasm of someone sharing art. There was a woman named Helen who worked in the records room and who had the particular quality of a person who has read so much that the line between things they have experienced and things they have read about has become somewhat negotiable. Mira liked Helen immediately and without the usual provisional period. On the third day, Cale sent for her. This meeting was in the same library as the first, but with a map spread across a low table between the chairs and a list written on parchment beside it. He had marked certain locations on the map with a small notation she did not immediately understand. These are the settlements in the outer territories that have shown unusual patterns over the last 4 months, he said. Reports from my formal agents have been inconsistent. They observe calm and then report unrest a week later. They speak to village elders and find cooperation, and then the same elders block resource allocation within a fortnight. There is a gap between what my agents are told and what is actually happening, and I need to understand what is in that gap. She studied the map. Most of the marked settlements were in the border regions, the places where the 6 territories met, and the authority structure was most complicated. She recognized 2 of the names. They were trade towns she had heard mentioned at the merchant quarter in Edenmore, places where carts went and came back with goods and sometimes with news. What do your agents look like when they visit? She said. He looked at her. Like palace agents, she said. They carry themselves like people with authority. They ask formal questions through formal channels. The village elders know exactly who they are and what they represent before they say a word. Yes, he said. And no one tells official people the true version, she said. They tell them the version that will cause the least disruption to their own situation. That is the problem I am trying to solve, he said. I can go in as a traveler, she said. I know how to carry myself like someone who is not important. I have spent my entire life being not important. It is one of my more reliable skills. She looked at the first location on the list. I would need to understand what you are looking for, not questions to ask, the shape of what is wrong, so I know it when I see it. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with that focused attention. The unrest follows a pattern, he said. It begins with minor complaints about ceremony laws, specifically, the older pack laws about claiming, about hierarchy, about the ranking of unmated females in community decisions. The complaints are legitimate, the laws are old, and some of them are poorly matched to how communities actually function. But the complaints are being amplified and directed in a way that does not feel organic. She went very still. Someone is making these complaints louder, she said. Someone is using them, he said, for a purpose I have not yet identified. The word ceremony sat between them in the room like something with weight. The claiming ceremony in Edenmore, she said, was not an isolated event, he said. There were 17 scheduled ceremonies in border settlements in the last month. Most of the women on the attendance lists were from families with no pack connections, no advocates. She thought of her name on that list, the specific way it had felt to read it, like a door being closed from the outside. You knew about Edenmore before I arrived, she said. I knew about the pattern, he said. I did not know about you specifically. But you were already investigating. Investigating, he said, is too formal a word for what I have been doing. I have been watching. I have not yet understood what I am watching. She looked at the map for a long moment. The marked settlements formed something when she traced them with her eye. Not a random scatter but a shape. An arc from the eastern edge of the territory to the northwest corner, like a boundary being drawn. When do I start? She said. When you are ready, he said. She was ready now, but she looked at the map for another moment before she said so, because she was reading it, and what she was reading was making the quiet sound in her chest slightly louder, in a way she could not explain, and was not yet willing to examine. I am ready, she said. He nodded. She stood to go, and at the door she paused because a thought had arrived that she needed to say aloud before it became something she kept to herself. The women on those lists, she said, without turning around. The 17 villages. If someone is using the ceremony laws to direct where women without advocates end up, that is not political unrest. That is something else. I know, he said. She turned to look at him. His face was still in the way she was beginning to understand meant he had already thought this through and was past the shock of it into the planning, the way still water is not peaceful but is moving somewhere underneath. I am going to find out who is doing it, she said. It was not a question. I know, he said again, and this time there was something in his voice that was not just agreement. She went back to her room. She stood at the window that looked out over the inner courtyard and watched a guard cross the space below with the efficient motion of someone with a destination. and she felt the shape of the next thing settle into place around her. She had come here with nothing. She had been going nowhere. Now she was going 6 specific places on a map in a border territory, looking for the gap between what officials were told and what was actually happening, for the king of the territory she had accidentally fallen into, in exchange for her safety and her wages and the understanding that no one was going to claim her without her agreement. The sound in her chest was quiet but present, the way a distant bell is present after it has rung. She could not identify it. She was not going to try yet. She had work to do first. She turned from the window and started thinking about how to look like no one important passing through a village that was being watched. She was very, very good at looking like no one important. It was, as she had told him, one of her most reliable skills. She left for the first settlement on the 4th morning, before the palace woke properly, when the corridors were dim and the kitchens were only beginning to find their noise. Edith had arranged her travel clothes, worn, practical, the kind that said working person rather than anything else. George had put food in a pack without being asked, wrapped in the same oilcloth he used for the staff meals on their days off. Oliver had looked at her over a stack of linens and said, with complete seriousness, that if she needed a character reference anywhere, he could tell people she was a linen merchant's assistant, and he would make it convincing. She had thanked him for this. She traveled the first leg by a cart she paid for herself, because Cale had given her money for expenses, and she had kept the transaction as ordinary as possible. A woman traveling alone to visit a cousin in Hartley Cross. That was her story. Simple, unremarkable. The kind that no one asks follow-up questions about because the answer is obvious and boring. Hartley Cross was a settlement of about 400 people, a logging community set against the edge of a forest that provided work for most of the village, and timber for much of the Eastern Territory. It was, by every external measure, exactly what it appeared to be, a working community that went to sleep early and woke with the light and organized itself around practical requirements. Except, she arrived at midday and walked through the settlement at the pace of someone who knows where she is going, even when she does not. She stopped at the inn and had a meal, because eating in public places was the fastest way to become part of the ordinary scenery, and while she ate she listened. She was very good at listening while appearing to do something else. What she heard was not dramatic. It was the accumulation of small things. A woman at the next table, perhaps 50, describing a meeting that had been held the previous week. Not an official village meeting, not one organized through the Elders' Council, but a private gathering at someone's house. She described it as a discussion group. She used the words that Mira had heard used before, rights and tradition, and what has been taken from us over the years. The woman's companion listened and nodded, and said nothing that disagreed. Mira ate her meal. She walked through the rest of the settlement that afternoon and counted the things she saw. 3 houses with a specific mark on their doors that she did not immediately recognize. A small symbol, scratched into the wood at eye level. Easy to miss if you were not looking for something. She had been looking for something. She found one of the houses where a man was working in the yard, and she stopped to ask directions to a road she knew perfectly well, because asking directions gave her a reason to look at the mark more closely. It was not a pack mark. Pack marks were standardized, registered, part of the official system of community identification that the territories maintained for administrative purposes. This was something else, something newer, cut into wood rather than stamped, with the particular freshness of recent addition. She thanked the man for directions he did not need to give and walked on. She spent one night at the inn in Hartley Cross. In the evening, the common room filled with logging workers coming off their shift, and she sat in a corner with a drink and listened to the conversation without being part of it. She heard the phrase claiming laws twice. She heard the phrase the old way needs to return once, spoken by a young man to his friend, with the specific conviction of someone who has recently been told to think this, and has not yet examined whether he actually does. She paid attention to who was speaking to whom, not the content, the direction, who was pushing and who was receiving, where the energy in the room was being generated and where it was flowing to. She left Hartley Cross the next morning with a clear picture in her mind, and 3 more settlements on the map to visit. She moved through them over the following week, each one a different size, a different industry, different character. But the pattern was the same. The mark on the doors, different locations, different doors, but the same symbol, same freshness, same placement. The private meetings described as discussion groups, the specific phrases about claiming laws and tradition appearing in conversation in the particular flat tone of things that have been put there by someone other than the speaker. And underneath all of it, in every settlement, the same quiet reshaping of how people thought about unmated women, as problems to be solved, as resources to be allocated, as things that a properly organized community would manage appropriately. She collected everything she found, not in writing, she was too careful for that, but in memory, which was where she kept her most important things. She came back to the palace on the 8th day and went directly to the library. Kale was there, as she had somehow known he would be. He was standing at the window, the one that looked out on the garden she had watched for hours on her first day, reading something, and he turned when she came in with the particular quality of attention that she had stopped finding unsettling and started finding simply familiar. She told him what she had found, all of it, the marks, the meetings, the phrases, the direction of influence. She told it in order, without embellishment, the way she catalogued things, by what they were and not by how they made her feel. When she finished, the library was quiet for a moment. "The mark," he said, "can you draw it?" She picked up the pen from the desk and drew it on a piece of parchment. Simple lines, a specific configuration she had traced with her eyes enough times to reproduce precisely. He looked at it for a long time. His face did the thing she had noticed it did when something mattered. It became more still, not less expressive, but differently expressive, like the surface of water when the wind stops. "You know this symbol," she said. It was not a question. "I have seen it once before," he said. "In a report from my Eastern Territory administrator, 8 months ago. He described it as a minor symbol used by a fringe group with no organized structure." "It has organized structure now," she said. "Yes," he said. He looked at the drawing, and then at her, with an expression that she could not fully decode, but that contained something she recognized, the look of a person revising their understanding of a situation upward. "You found more in 8 days," he said, "than my agents have found in 4 months. Your agents are looking for what they expect to find," she said. "I was looking for the shape of what was wrong." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "That is the difference." She had meant to leave then. She had meant to give him the information, confirm the next steps, and go back to her room to process the week she had just had. She had meant to be efficient and practical, and keep the transaction exactly what it was, a transaction. But she had been away from the palace for 8 days, moving through villages that were being quietly rearranged by someone with a plan she had not yet fully understood, and the sound in her chest that she had been filing away, and not examining, had gotten louder rather than quieter, and being back in this room, this specific room, with this specific window and this specific fire, and this specific person, had done something to her composure that she was going to pretend had not happened. "Are you all right?" he said. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "You have been moving through communities where the situation you ran from is being deliberately manufactured," he said. "That is not a neutral experience." She had not expected him to say that. She had not expected him to notice. People with power, in her experience, were very focused on the information and much less focused on the person carrying it. "I am fine," she said. "It made me angry. Anger is useful." "Anger as a tool," he said. And there was something in the way he said it, quiet, almost to himself, that suggested it was not an unfamiliar concept to him. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment longer than the conversation required. "Rest," he said. "We will discuss the next locations tomorrow." She went to her room. She stood at the window over the inner courtyard and breathed the evening air coming through the glass, and let herself feel the week catching up with her. The distances traveled, the listening, the careful performance of unremarkable person, the weight of what she had found, and what it meant. Someone was building something in the border territories using the ceremony laws as materials and unmated women as resources. Someone had listed her name specifically. Someone had a plan that was bigger than one village or one season. And she was the only person in the palace who had gone into the settlements and seen it from the inside. She thought about the mark drawn on the parchment she had left in the library, the clean lines of it, the newness of each instance she had found. Someone had put that mark on those doors recently. Someone was moving through those communities making changes. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. She was going to find out who. She was also, and this was a fact she was beginning to accept with the same practical attention she gave to all facts, not going anywhere. She had stopped running 3 days into a week-long journey through the border territories without noticing the moment it happened. She had started, without deciding to, thinking of the palace as the place she was returning to rather than the place she was trapped in. She did not know what to do with that yet. She was going to put it in the drawer with the other things and deal with it when she had more information. She went to bed and slept deeply and without dreams, because she was tired, and because she had learned a long time ago that useful sleep required you to put things down for the night even when they felt too urgent to set aside. The things would still be there in the morning. They always were. The noble council met on the 15th day of every month in the east wing of the palace, in a room large enough for 20 people to sit around a table and still feel the walls. Mira had walked past the door of this room twice now on her regular routes through the palace. She had never been inside it. She had not needed to be. The council's decisions were a matter of record, filed in the records room where Helen worked, and Mira had been in the records room twice already, in the guise of looking for historical documents about the border settlements. The records room was extremely useful. Helen had been in it every time, which had turned out to be equally useful in a different way. Helen knew where everything was and, more importantly, had opinions about everything she filed. She described the council records the way a librarian describes books, not just what was in them but what they were like, what their character was, what they revealed about the people who had produced them. This one, Helen had said on Mira's second visit, pulling a sealed folder from a shelf, is Lord Fenwick's submission on border resource allocation. It reads very reasonably on the surface. He is always reasonable on the surface. Underneath the reasonableness, if you read carefully, every proposal consistently advantages 3 specific trade routes that run through his family's holdings. Does the king know? Mira had said. The king reads everything, Helen had said, filing the folder back with the specific satisfaction of someone returning a book to its proper place. Whether he acts on everything is a different question. Mira had thought about this. She thought about it again now, on the morning of the council meeting, as she stood in the corridor outside the records room and considered the information she was about to bring to Cale's attention. She had spent the previous 3 days going deeper into the documents, not the border settlement reports but the council history, specifically, the records of proposals made over the last 2 years regarding ceremony law, pack hierarchy, and the legal status of unmated women. She had been looking for the shape of the political version of what she had seen in the border villages, the official version, the version that wore reasonable clothes and used formal language, and said everything in terms of tradition and community stability. She had found it. 3 proposals, all submitted under different names but with a pattern in the language that was identical, the same phrases about restoring traditional structure, the same framing of community welfare as being dependent on proper management of unmated females, the same quiet advocacy for strengthening the claiming ceremony's legal force, making attendance mandatory rather than required under pain of exile, removing the technical option of refusal that women currently had, and most were too frightened to use. 3 proposals. 3 different noble names on the submission documents. But the language was the same. The sentence construction was the same. The logic was the same, in the specific way that logic is the same when it has been written by one person and distributed to 3 people to submit under their own names. She had the name of one of those nobles from Helen's description of the Fenwick folder. She had found the second name in the cross-references between proposals. The third name she had found in a footnote of a border resource document that had been CC'd to someone who was not listed on the main distribution. She had spent the 3rd evening following the paper trail of that footnote into a corner of the records room that Helen described, with the tone of someone giving a weather warning, as the section where things were filed when someone wanted them available but not findable. The name at the end of the trail was not a noble name. It was a merchant name, a specific merchant whose trading routes covered all 6 territories and whose supply convoys moved through every settlement she had visited in her first week of work. She had looked at that name for a long time in the quiet of the records room. Then she had put everything back in the order she had found it, thanked Helen with the casual warmth of someone who had been doing perfectly ordinary research, and gone to find Cale. She found him not in the library but in the East Garden, the formal one, which she had not been in before, which was arranged in the kind of geometric precision that said power and not nature. He was standing at the far end of it speaking with his head advisor, a man named Colin whose face was constructed primarily from skepticism, and who had looked at Mira on their first introduction, with the specific expression of someone calculating risk. She waited until Colin had finished whatever he was saying and walked away, and then she crossed the garden. Cale watched her come. He had the quality that she noticed in people who were genuinely alert. They did not watch things to appear watchful. They watched because they were taking in information, and the difference showed in how the attention was held. "I found something," she said. "Come inside," he said. They went to the library. She told him everything she had found, in the same order she always told him things. From the specific observation outward, to the implication, never the other way. Because implications without specifics were just theories, and she dealt in facts. When she finished with the merchant's name, there was a silence. Then Cale said, very quietly, "Daniel Marsh." She looked at him. "You know this name," she said. "I know this man. he said. He has been in this palace twice in the last 6 months. Both times on legitimate trade business, both times approved by my council. The library was very quiet. Which members of your council approved his visits? She said. He told her the names. 2 of them were the names she had found on the proposals. She watched his face process this. The stillness that meant calculation, not absence. The slight adjustment around the eyes that was his version of what a less controlled person would have shown on every feature. Who else have you told about this? He said. No one, she said. I came to you first. Good, he said. And there was something in the way he said it, not praise exactly, but the specific kind of recognition that passes between 2 people who are operating at the same level of seriousness about a serious thing, that settled something in her chest. The merchant's supply routes, she said. They move through every settlement where I found the marks on the doors. Yes, he said. He would have access to every community in the border territories. And 2 members of your council are smoothing his access to this palace, and submitting his ideas under their own names, she said. Yes, he said. Then, the gap between what your agents are told and what is actually happening, she said, is coming partly from inside this building. He was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said. He said it like a door being closed, final, decided. She sat back. The fire crackled. Outside, Colin was probably doing something efficient and unaware that his assessment of palace risk needed significant updating. What do you want to do? She said. He looked at her with that focused attention that she had stopped finding unnerving somewhere around day 4 in the palace, and had started finding simply clarifying, as though under it things that were blurry in normal life came into proper resolution. I want, he said, to understand the full shape of what is being built before I dismantle any of it, because if I move too early, the pieces I do not yet see will go underground, and then I will never find them. So we watch, she said. You watch, he said. You continue to move through the settlements, you learn the shape. When we know it completely, we move. She nodded. He was right. She knew he was right because it was the same principle she had applied to the records room. You did not pull one thread and alert the rest of the pattern. You mapped everything first, then you made your choices. There is one more thing, she said. He waited. The ceremony, she said. In each settlement, the claiming ceremonies being organized in the border communities. You said there were 17 in the last month. Yes, he said. The women on those lists, she said. I was on one of those lists. The others. Do you know where they ended up, after the ceremonies? He was quiet for a moment. Not all of them, he said. The fire crackled. She felt the thing that she had been angry about since Edenmore's shift in her chest, the familiar heat of it, the sweet and known feeling of anger, which was so much more manageable than fear. Then that is also part of what I am going to find, she said. He looked at her. Yes, he said. And this time there was something in the word that was not just agreement and not just instruction. It was the sound of 2 people looking at the same thing and understanding, without needing to say it, that they were going to do something about it. She went back to her room. She stood at the window over the inner courtyard and looked at the evening sky coming down over the palace, and thought about Daniel Marsh's supply routes, and the marks on the doors, and the lists of names, and the gap between what officials were told and what was actually happening. And she felt the shape of it assembling in her mind, the way a map assembles from individual pieces of territory. She also felt, and she was going to be honest with herself about this even if she was not ready to be honest with anyone else, that the sound in her chest was not getting quieter. It was a thing she was going to have to think about. Not yet. But soon. The second visit to Hartley Cross was not planned. She had been on her way to a different settlement, 3 hours east, when the cart driver stopped at a crossroads to let a delivery vehicle pass, and she looked down the road to the left, and saw a face she recognized walking between 2 men she did not. The face was a woman named Nell. She had seen her in the common room at the inn on her first visit, a bright-eyed young woman with red hair who had been working behind the counter and had given Mira an extra portion of bread without being asked, with the kind of automatic generosity that comes from having had an empty plate yourself at some point. Nell was walking between the 2 men with her hands at her sides and the specific downward angle of her head that Mira recognized as the posture of a person who is being compliant in a situation they do not want to be compliant in. She told the driver to stop. She climbed down. She followed them at a distance, staying on the far side of the road, moving in the pattern she had developed for places where she needed to be present but invisible, stopping to look at things, adjusting her pack, creating the natural pauses of a traveler who has no particular urgency. The two men and Nell turned off the main road into a side lane that led toward the south edge of the settlement. Mira followed as far as she could without losing the natural cover of the road traffic and stopped when the lane went to open ground. She could see where they were going. A building at the edge of the tree line, not a residence, something more like a storage facility, with covered windows and a door that closed behind the three of them before she could see more. She stood in the lane and breathed slowly and thought. She did not have enough information to know what she was looking at. She had a gut response, which was significant alarm, and she had the training of 8 days spent looking at the pattern, and both of these were telling her that Nell's situation was not voluntary. She also did not have a plan for this specific circumstance. She thought about Cale's instruction: watch, map the full shape, move only when the picture is complete. She thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. Then she walked to the building and knocked on the door. The man who opened it was not either of the two she had followed. He was older, with the administrative look of someone who manages things rather than does them, and he looked at her with polite confusion. "I am looking for my cousin," Mira said. "Nell, red hair. I was told she came this way." The man's expression did not change in any dramatic way, but something behind it rearranged itself, the micro-adjustment of someone calculating, rather than responding. "There's no one here by that name," he said. "She just came in," Mira said. 3 minutes ago, with 2 men. I saw her from the road." "You must have seen someone else," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. The door was open enough for her to see past his shoulder, and she saw 2 things. A corridor, and at the end of the corridor, a figure with red hair disappearing through a door on the right side. "I see," she said. She smiled, because smiling was the thing that confused people who expected the expression that was warranted, and got a different one. She thanked him for his time. She walked back up the lane to the road. She did not go to the next settlement. She went back toward the palace, faster than she had come out, because she was carrying information that had moved from the category of investigation into the category of urgency, and there was a line she had identified in the last 30 seconds that she was not willing to let the patience of a slow-building picture keep her on the wrong side of. She arrived at the palace in the late afternoon and found Cale in the room adjacent to the library where he worked when he needed access to documents and a table larger than the reading chairs allowed. She told him about Nell, the men, the building, the closed door. She watched his face go through the same process she had seen when she told him about Daniel Marsh. The stillness, the calculation, the adjustment. "Give me the location," he said. She described it exactly: the road, the crossroads, the lane, the tree line, the building's position relative to the trees. He looked at Colin, who had been in the room when she entered, and was now standing very straight with the expression of someone who had just significantly revised their calculations. "Take 3 men," Cale said. "Tonight." Quietly. Colin nodded and left. Mira stood in the middle of the room after he had gone, and felt the anger in her chest burn clean and useful and familiar. "There are others," she said. "If Nell is being held, if this is what the building is being used for, then Hartley Cross is not the only settlement with such a building." "No," Cale said. "It probably is not. The 17 women on the ceremony lists," she said. "I know," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. In the silence between them there was everything that the next 3 words would have been, if either of them had said them, and neither of them said them, and the silence was loud enough to be its own kind of statement. "This is bigger than ceremony laws," she said. "It became bigger than ceremony laws," he said, "when someone decided that the laws were not a tradition to be argued about, but a mechanism to be used." She breathed. "I should have found this faster," she said. "You found it in 3 weeks," he said. "No one else had found it in 4 months." "Nell has been in that building for at least 3 minutes longer than she should have been," she said. "She will be out of it tonight," he said, and his voice had the quality of a decision rather than a reassurance, the sound of someone who says things because they will do them, rather than because they hope to. She went to her room. She sat on the bed in the early evening light and put her hands flat on her knees and breathed in and out, and let herself feel the full weight of what she had just understood. Someone had built a system inside the border territories of the 6 northern territories, a system that used ancient pack laws about ceremony and claiming, and the status of unmated women as cover for something else entirely, not tradition, not even political advantage, something that moved people like cargo through a network that had a merchant supply routes at its center, and 2 members of the noble council at its protected edges, and a symbol scratched into doors in every settlement as its quiet signature. She had left Edenmore in the back of a cart with bread and straw in her hair, trying to escape one man's intention to claim her, and she had landed in the middle of this. Her name had been on a list. She had been a specific name on a specific list, and she had run, and the running had delivered her to the one place in the 6 territories where someone was already paying attention to the pattern. She thought about the shape of that, the geometry of it, the way her personal disaster and the larger catastrophe had intersected, and she felt something she did not have an immediate name for, not quite gratitude, not quite relief, not quite the specific vertigo of understanding how close a thing had been. Something in her chest was very loud. She put her hands over it, and looked at the ceiling, and let herself think the thing she had been not thinking for 3 weeks. He had asked her why she ran, at the side of the supply cart, with straw in her hair, and the morning light going gold on the palace walls. He had asked it simply, and she had answered truthfully because something in the way he asked had reached past every defense she had built, and gotten to the truth before she could put anything in the way. She had been building those defenses since she was 12 years old. She was good at them. They had never before failed to deploy in time. He had gotten there before they were up, and they had not gone back up. Not in 3 weeks of palace life and border territory investigation, and the careful transaction of exchanging information for safety. And she was aware that this was a problem. It was the kind of problem she did not have a solution for yet. She was, however, beginning to understand that she was going to have to find one. She could hear, somewhere in the distance, the palace guard beginning the evening rotation. The steady sound of boots on stone, the voice of the rotation captain calling numbers, the ordinary machinery of a large household organizing itself for the night. She had work to do tomorrow. She had 3 more settlements to visit. She had a merchant's supply routes to trace, and a symbol's full distribution to map, and a question about 16 women, whose locations she did not yet know. She had all of that. She also had the sound in her chest that was not going away. She was going to solve the problems in order, starting with the ones that other people's safety depended on. But she was going to solve the other one too. Eventually. On the night of the attempted attack, she was in the records room. She had gone there after the evening meal, as she sometimes did when Helen was working late and the palace was quiet enough to think in. She had been following the paper trail of Daniel Marsh's official documents, specifically the shipping manifests filed with the Palace Trade Office over the last 2 years, looking for the names of the settlements where deliveries had been made that did not match the goods he was registered to trade in. There were 11 of them. She had 9 written on a small piece of parchment in her own hand when the sound started. It was not a dramatic sound. That was what she would remember about it later. It was not alarming in the way that alarming sounds usually are. It was the sound of something being moved in the corridor, furniture perhaps, or the heavy roll of a cart, the kind of sound that a palace at night produces without incident. She noticed it because she noticed everything, because her entire skill set was organized around noticing things that were present, but not announced. She noticed it, and then she noticed that it was coming from the direction of Cale's working room, and then she noticed that the sound was followed by the absence of the guard, who was normally stationed at the end of the corridor by this hour. She went to the corridor. The guard was not there. She stood very still and listened and felt the back of her neck register something that was not quite sound and not quite temperature, but was the unmistakable communication of something being wrong, in a space that was usually right. She moved. She went toward his working room, quickly and quietly, because quick and quiet were the skills she had, and this did not feel like a moment for any other kind. The corridor was empty. The door to the working room was ajar in a way that it was never ajar at this hour. She opened it. The room was not empty. There were 2 men she did not recognize positioned at opposite ends of the room, and between them and the desk, Cale was standing with his hands steady, and his face with that particular stillness she had come to understand as the total absence of being surprised. One of the men had a knife. She did the only thing that made sense, which was to walk into the room, because walking away was not something she was going to do, and to make enough noise with her entrance that both men had to process her as a new variable. And in the second that both of them were processing her, she said, at full volume, the name of the guard who was stationed 2 corridors away. She said it twice, loud, because loud was the version that carried. The man with the knife looked at her. She looked back at him, with the full force of someone who has been functioning on anger as a primary fuel source for 3 weeks, and has reserves. The sound of boots in the corridor arrived within 15 seconds. Both men, when the guards came through the door, chose to stop, not out of courage, out of arithmetic. She stood in the room while Cale directed the guards to secure the men, And then she stood in the room while the guards left with them, and then she was in the room alone with Cale and the evidence of a situation that had just moved from investigation into something else. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Your room," he said quietly. "I beg your pardon," she said. "Your room is on the opposite side of the palace from this corridor," he said. "You were in the records room." "I was following Marsh's shipping manifests," she said. "At this hour," he said. "I found 9 settlements," she said. "I had 3 more to check." He was quiet for a moment in the aftermath of the room, in the particular silence of a space where something significant has just finished happening. She could hear her own heartbeat, which had been conducting itself with considerable enthusiasm for the last several minutes. "They knew where my room was," he said. "They did not know where you would be." She understood what he was saying. Her presence, at an hour when no one expected her to be in that corridor, had changed the situation. "I was lucky in my choice of research material," she said. "No," he said. "You were thorough in your habits." She did not know what to do with this. She stood in the middle of the room and felt the adrenaline beginning to move out of her body in the slow way it does when the need for it has passed, leaving behind a slightly shaky clarity. "The men who sent these 2, she said, "they know we are getting close." "They know someone is," he said. "They do not know it is you." "They know it is coming from the palace," she said. "Yes," he said. "Which means someone inside the palace," she said, "is telling them what we are doing." "Yes," he said. He said it with the stillness that meant he had already been thinking this, and was now confirmed rather than informed. She thought about the 2 council members. She thought about Colin, who was efficient and loyal but whose loyalties she had not traced to their origins. She thought about Edith, who knew everything about the household and had the full picture of who was where at what hour. "We need to be careful," she said, "about who we tell anything to." "Yes," he said. "From this point." She breathed. And then something happened that she had not planned for, and had no category for, because all of her plans were for situations that had categories. He crossed the room in 2 steps and put his hand on her face, very carefully, very still, the palm against her cheek, like something he was checking was real, and looked at her with an expression that was not the careful stillness of the king considering information, but something entirely different, something underneath that, something older. She did not move. His hand was warm, steady, certain in the specific way of hands that are not doing something uncertain. "You walked into this room," he said. "Yes," she said. "You could have gone the other direction," he said. "No," she said. "I could not have." He was quiet. His hand did not move. She thought about the sound in her chest, which was currently performing at full volume, and about the drawer she had been putting things in, and about the fact that the drawer was clearly not as secure as she had been assuming. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I know," he said. "I think," she said, "you may be a fact I have not yet filed correctly." He looked at her with those deep, patient eyes, and something moved in them that she had not seen there before, something warmer and less careful than his usual expression, something that suggested that the stillness was a discipline rather than a nature. "I know," he said again, softly this time. She stood in the middle of the room that had almost become a disaster and felt the shape of the last 3 weeks rearranging itself around this moment, all the things she had filed and not examined and put away for later, and she understood, with the specific clarity that only comes when you stop running from something long enough to turn and look at it, that she had not stopped running from Edenmore. She had stopped running entirely. She did not know when. "We have work to do," she said, "in the morning." "Yes," he said. His hand dropped. He stepped back. But his expression did not go back to what it had been before he crossed the room. It stayed somewhere different, somewhere she could see. She went back to her room. She did not sleep. She lay on the bed she had been sleeping in for 3 weeks that had become, without her deciding this, the bed that was hers, and she looked at the ceiling and felt the last several hours moving through her. The discovery, the attack, the corridor, the room, and at the center of all of it, his hand on her face like something being checked was real. She was going to finish the work first, the manifests, the symbol, the settlements, the 16 women, the merchant and his routes and the 2 council members and whoever in the palace was sharing information they should not have. She was going to finish all of it. And then she was going to think about the thing she had been not thinking about. She was going to think about it properly. In the morning she went back to the records room and found the last 3 settlements on the shipping manifest and wrote them down. 11 settlements. 11 destinations where goods had been delivered that should not have been there. She had the shape now. She had nearly the full shape. She went to find Kale and told him she was almost done. On the morning of the council hearing, the palace was very quiet. Mira had been awake since before dawn, sitting at the desk in her room with everything she had collected over the past 3 weeks arranged in front of her, in the form of notes written in her own shorthand. Not the full detail, she was carrying that in her memory, where she kept the things she trusted most, but the structure, the shape of it, the way each piece connected to the next. She had been refining the structure in her mind for 4 days, since Kale had told her that the information was complete enough to move on, that the men captured in his working room had provided, under questioning she had not been present for and did not ask about in detail, the confirmation of what she had suspected about the involvement at the palace level. 2 council members, a third who had been aware and had said nothing, which under the Northern Territories laws made him as liable as the others, Daniel Marsh, whose name was on 11 shipping records that contained impossible goods at settlements where those goods should never have arrived, and one other name, the name at the center of it all, the source of the idea and the money and the patient, methodical building of a structure designed to look like political advocacy, while it did something much more specific underneath. That name had come from the men in the working room. She had looked at it when Kale told her, and felt something she did not have a clean word for, the recognition of a thing you suspected without being sure you were not imagining it, arriving in confirmed form. Elder Croft. Not Owen, the elder himself, who had been running the claiming ceremonies in Edenmore for 17 years, who had a network of contacts in the merchant quarter that extended, she now understood, to Daniel Marsh's supply routes, who had been building the mechanism slowly for a very long time, using the ceremony laws as the visible structure while the actual purpose moved underneath. The actual purpose being power, territory, control of the border settlements through control of who lived in them, and under what terms, and with what legal status. She had read the document Kale showed her, the full layout as his legal team had assembled it, and she had felt the scope of it settle over her like weather. She had been on that list because she was from Edenmore, because Elder Croft had been using his own village as the first test case, because she had no family, no advocates, no pack connections, all the qualities that made someone easy to move through a system without anyone asking what happened to them. She had run. She had run in the specific direction of the one person in the 6 territories who had both the power and the existing investigation to do something about it. She sat at her desk in the early morning and thought about the particular luck of this, and about luck as a concept, and about the night in the working room, and his hand on her face, and then she put all of that away, because there were a few hours yet to get through before she could think about anything that was not the council hearing. She had been told to attend, not to speak, necessarily, though she had testimony to give if testimony was called for, to attend, to be present, to be, as Kale had put it with the slight dryness she had started to recognize as his version of humor, the living evidence. She was, technically, the only woman from any of the 17 settlement lists who was currently present in the palace rather than accounted for or missing. She dressed in the good clothes Edith had produced for formal occasions, which were simple and well-made and did not announce themselves. She went downstairs. Edith was in the corridor outside the council room, which was unusual. She looked at Mira when she arrived with the same expression she had on the day she produced the formal clothes, assessing, composed, containing opinions. "Ready," Edith said. "Yes," Mira said. Edith looked at her for a moment longer. "You have straw in your hair," she said. Mira's hand went to her head. There was no straw. She understood, after a moment, that Edith was making a reference, and that this was the closest Edith was going to come to expressing something warm. "Thank you," Mira said. Edith turned toward the door. "He asked me," she said, almost to the door rather than to Mira, 2 days after you arrived, whether I thought you were trustworthy. I told him I thought you were the most comprehensively capable person to arrive in this palace in 4 years, and that he should not waste you." Mira said nothing, because she did not know what to say to this. "Go in," Edith said, and held the door. The council room was full, 20 people around the table, several others standing at the edges. She recognized Colin, whose face had the expression of a man who has recently done significant recalculating and is still in the middle of it. She recognized Helen, who had been asked to attend as keeper of the records and who gave Mira, across the room, a small nod that contained a great deal of information. She recognized 3 of the names from her investigation sitting at the council table and not looking comfortable. She did not sit. She stood at the side of the room and watched. Kale entered last. The room arranged itself differently when he came in, not dramatically, no one made a performance of it, but everyone in the space made a small involuntary adjustment, like a compass in the presence of north. He sat at the head of the table. He said, without preamble, "We are going to go through what has been found, in order, starting with the shipping manifests." Helen opened the first document. It took 4 hours. Mira listened and watched and answered 3 questions when she was asked, clearly and specifically, with the same plain directness she had used in the library 3 weeks ago and every conversation since. She did not embellish. She did not explain herself. She gave facts in sequence and let them produce their own conclusions, because facts in sequence are more compelling than any framing put around them. By the end of the 4th hour, the room had the particular quality of a space where something large has finally been seen properly, and everyone present is still adjusting to the scale of it. Elder Croft was not in the room. He was, as of 2 days ago, in the custody of the territory marshal. Owen, she had been told, was with him. She thought about that and did not feel what she expected to feel. She expected relief, or something close to victory, or the specific satisfaction of a problem solved. What she felt was simpler, a kind of quiet, the quiet of something that has been making noise stopping. The council meeting concluded. People began to file out with the subdued energy of people who have been inside something important and are now returning to air. She went to the corridor. She stood there, feeling the 4 hours and the 3 weeks and everything before them all settling at once, which took a moment because there was a lot to settle. She heard footsteps. She did not turn around. She did not need to. He came to stand beside her in the corridor, and they stood there together in the ordinary morning light of the palace with the sounds of the household moving around them, and he said, "Are you all right?" She thought about this. "Yes," she said. "I think I actually am. The marshal will arrange transport for you to return to Edenmore," he said, "to give formal testimony about the ceremony you were listed in. You will be protected through the full process." She nodded. There was a pause. "And after the testimony," he said. She looked at him. "You could go anywhere," he said. "The protection extends wherever you choose to go. You would have resources. You would not need to return here if you did not want to." She considered this offer. She considered it in the full understanding that it was real, that he meant it, that there were no conditions attached to it and no expectation underneath it, and that if she said she was going somewhere else, he would arrange the resources for that and not argue. She had come here in a cart with nothing, planning to go somewhere that was not here, and she had found herself staying, and she had spent 3 weeks telling herself it was because there was work to do, and there had been work to do. But she was honest enough with herself in this specific corridor in this specific moment to know that the work was not the only reason. "I would like to go to Edenmore," she said, "to give the testimony." "Yes," he said. "And then," she said, "I would like to come back." He was very still for a moment. "Why?" he said, and it was the same question he had asked at the side of the cart, not demanding, not hopeful, just asking, just wanting to know, with his full attention aimed at her answer. She thought about the right way to say this. "I have been running since I was 12 years old," she said, "in one way or another, running from things that were about to happen to me, running from situations I did not choose and could not control, running from the next thing on someone else's list." She looked at him. "I stopped," she said, "at some point in the last 3 weeks. I do not know the exact day, but I stopped, and I would like to see what that is like for a while. And this is where I stopped." The corridor was very quiet. He looked at her with those deep, patient eyes, and the stillness in his face was not the stillness of calculation, but the stillness of something that has been waiting long enough that it has gone quiet. "Then come back," he said, quietly. "I will," she said. She went back to her room to pack the small amount she had that was hers now, the formal clothes, the worn travel clothes, the notes she had made in her own shorthand, the small piece of parchment with 11 settlement names. She packed all of it. She set her pack by the door. She stood at the window over the inner courtyard one more time and looked at the space below, where guards were crossing with the efficient motion of people with destinations, where the morning light was coming in at the angle that made everything briefly gold. She had left Edenmore with nothing. She was leaving the palace with a name on a piece of testimony, a job that suited her, a goat safely residing on the South Farm, and something she was not yet calling by its name but which she could feel with complete clarity in her chest, steady and present and growing. She picked up her pack. She went to give the testimony. She came back. The kitchen at midnight was exactly the way she had expected it to be. Dim, warm, very quiet, with a low lamp burning above the center table, and the smell of the day's cooking still present in the walls the way smells settle into stone and stay. She was eating leftover bread and a piece of hard cheese that had been left under a cloth on the shelf, because she had been too tired at dinner to eat properly, and hunger was not a condition she had the patience for at this hour. She had been back from Edenmore for 6 days. The testimony had taken 2 days. Elder Croft had sat in the hall of the territory marshal and listened to the testimony of 17 witnesses, of whom she was one, with the specific expression of a man who had spent a long time being certain he was untouchable, and was currently processing the discovery that this was incorrect. Owen had sat beside him with the expression of a man who had not fully understood the machinery he was part of until the machinery was being dismantled in front of him in a formal hearing. She had given her testimony plainly, the way she did everything, facts in order, specific details. The list, the date, the drums, the cart. The part about the cart had been the moment when the hall went completely silent, the particular silence of a room full of people realizing simultaneously that the mechanism they were examining had made a significant error when it put a specific name on a specific list. She had returned to the palace on the 3rd day. She had been sleeping well for the first time in recent memory, which was either a sign of resolution or exhaustion or both. She heard footsteps in the corridor outside the kitchen door. She looked at her bread. The door opened. "You are awake," Cale said, which was not a question. "You are also awake," she said, which was equally not one. He came into the kitchen and stood on the other side of the center table, looking at the bread and the cheese and her, with an expression that was not quite the careful professional attention, and not quite the working room corridor expression, and not quite anything she had a category for yet. "Old habits," she said. "I wake up in the small hours and I need to eat something. I have had this habit since I was young. It is not going away." "I know," he said. "I have been aware of it for most of the last month." She looked at him. "You have been aware," she said. "The kitchen staff mentioned it," he said. "George in particular. He started leaving things under the cloth on the shelf." She looked at the cloth-covered shelf. She looked at the bread in her hand. She thought about George, 62, with his opinions about root vegetables, leaving food for her at this hour without being asked. She put the bread down for a moment, because she did not trust herself to eat it without doing something undignified, like feeling things publicly. "Sit down," she said. He sat down across the table from her. She picked the bread back up and ate a piece of it. He sat across from her in the lamp-lit kitchen and did not hurry her or the moment. This was, she thought, one of his qualities. He did not hurry things. He was patient in the way that people are patient when they have enough certainty about the outcome to allow the pace to be whatever it needed to be. She thought about what she was going to say for approximately as long as it took her to eat another piece of bread, which was not very long because she had decided what she was going to say on the 5th night of her return, and had been waiting for the right moment, and the right moment was apparently midnight in a kitchen with leftover bread and the smell of the day's cooking in the walls. "I have been thinking," she said. "Yes," he said. "About what you said in the corridor," she said, "after the hearing." "Yes," he said. "And what I said," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at him across the table. "I said I wanted to come back," she said, "and I have been trying to be precise about why, because I am very careful about being precise about things that matter, and this matters." He waited. "I came here with nothing," she said. "I have said this before, but I want to say it again, because I think it is the important part. I had nothing. I was on a list that I did not put myself on, going to a situation I did not choose, with no way to change either of those things by any conventional means. I climbed into a cart in the dark and went wherever it was going and happened to end up here." "Yes," he said. "But it was not entirely happening," she said. "I made choices. I chose to run. I chose the cart. I chose to stay when you made the offer. I chose to go into those settlements, and I chose to walk into your working room when I heard something wrong. And I chose to come back after the testimony when I could have gone anywhere." He was very still. "I am telling you this," she said, "because I want you to understand that when I tell you the thing I am about to tell you, it is also a choice, not a fact that was decided for me, not a list someone put my name on, not a ceremony I was required to attend or a system I was being moved through." She looked at him. She said, "I want to stay, not because I have nowhere else to go, not because you offered me safety, not because of any arrangement we made or any protection I needed. I want to stay because this is where I stopped running, and I would like to find out what the not running version of my life looks like, and I would like to find it out here." She picked up the bread roll from the center of the table. It had been sitting there the whole conversation, round and solid and uncomplicated, and threw it at him. He caught it. He caught it without any particular speed or drama, the way he did everything, with the easy competence of someone for whom the world cooperates because it understands that it had better. He looked at her. Something in his expression opened, the careful surface of it giving way to what was underneath, which was warmer and older, and had been there for weeks, she now understood, quietly present while the professional attention was in front of it. "You threw bread at me," he said. "I wanted to see if you would catch it," she said. "And if I had not," he said. "You were always going to catch it," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. And this time the word contained everything, all of the 3 weeks, and the library, and the border settlements, and the corridor, and the cart, and the drums of Edenmore very far away, and the particular morning when he had stood at the side of a supply vehicle and asked a woman covered in straw why she had run, and she had told him the truth, and the truth had been the beginning of something neither of them had planned. She ate the rest of her bread. He sat with her in the kitchen until the lamp burned low, and they talked about ordinary things, about George's opinions, about Helen's reading, about the South Farm and the goat who was apparently thriving, and had been observed standing on top of a garden wall surveying its territory with enormous self-satisfaction. Outside, the palace was dark and quiet, the guards on their rotation, the household at rest, the 6 territories, extending outward from this specific kitchen in all directions under the same sky. She had arrived in a cart with straw in her hair and bread in her pocket, and the drums of a village she was never going back to fading behind her. She was staying because she chose to. That was the whole story. That was the only version of it that mattered. The lamp burned low, the kitchen was warm. The morning was still a few hours away, and she was not running toward it or away from it but simply sitting with it, the way you sit with something you have decided to keep. She let herself have that. She had earned it.